is open. So we have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. We'll move to item 3, approval of the minutes from last May. Motion to approve the minutes.
I so moved.
Okay. Second?
Gonna wait and see if Mary Jo had any.
No, no,
No
no comments.
Okay, all right.
Then I'll second.
Approved and seconded for the minutes for May. Item 4 is open for public forum. This time is set aside for public comments on topics that would be of concern to the Historic Preservation Commission, other than the items that we have on the agenda. The chairperson may limit each speaker to 5 minutes. Please understand that the commission is not likely to take any action on the comments at this meeting due to the requirements of the open meeting law, but may do so at a future meeting. Any public comment? Not at this time. Okay, closed. So, item number 5, certificate of appropriateness for 802 Burnett Avenue. And I think Eloise has got the details
right.
on that.
Yes, thank you. So we received a certificate of appropriateness to construct the what we're calling brick fence with extended features in the rear yard of the house located at 802 Burnett Avenue. This property, some of you will remember, came before the HBC in 2018 for the reconstruction of the front porch and other items that they were doing. And all of that work has been completed and it looks really great. In this case, the property, just to back up, is a single family residence with a detached garage built in approximately 1910 in the Queen Anne style. It's located on a corner lot at 9th Street in Burnett. So the applicant, Dan Klotz, how do you say it, Ann?
Coles.
Colts, I'm so sorry, Colts, describes the features of his request as a stone patio and appurtenances. We're categorizing it as a fence, including a low hip brick wall and trellis consisting of 3 brick columns with inwardly stretching arms and a brick grill. These elements are proposed in the rear yard, detached from the historic home. The applicant has included some drawings that are in your packet, 3D renderings of the proposed project. So Chapter 31 does not regulate the addition of patios, so that's not part of the review. The only proposed element that is regulated under the certificate of appropriateness is the construction of the fence. Chapter 31 defines a fence broadly as a man-made barrier used as an enclosure or as a boundary. Since the brick columns are an integral part of the brick hip wall and are located along the hip wall at the property line, staff is classifying the entire structure as part of the fence, including the extended features. So I'm going to drop down to the part that talks about contributing I'm going to drop down to the zoning part. So this property is located in the RM zoning district, residential medium density zoning district. The location, that means there's certain, the RM district defines setbacks, and the location of the historic house on the property is such that the north setback and the east setback are what's called non-conforming. And that's not unusual. What happens is the zoning ordinance can be changed and updated, and it means that properties that were previously approved at some point in time under the standards of that time remain, but they are considered non-conforming. And non-conforming structures are allowed to remain, but are not allowed to expand their non-conformity. What that means, and in this case, they're not proposing to expand the non-conformity, but sometimes we've had contributing garages that are located on the property line. They don't meet the setback. So if they wanted to expand a garage, they have to expand it in a direction that's different than the part that's non-conforming. Just so you understand that a little bit better, because it can be confusing. So then the section 29402 in the zoning ordinance defines what you can have in a setback. So this property would be subject to those rules, just as any property is. And it says that patios and fences are allowed to be in the setback. That's not unusual. Fences are allowed according to the height limitations described in the zoning ordinance, which is a maximum of 6 feet in the rear yard. And then the setbacks also include a provision that allows what is termed landscape accents that may also project into a setback area. And there's more language about that. And then, so the property has several layers of things. It's in the single family conservation overlay district. That district includes compatibility standards, but in this case, there are no compatibility standards that address patios or fences. So it doesn't really apply that way. Under the historic preservation overlay, which of course you guys are the most familiar with, a certificate of appropriateness is required for fences and can be granted as new construction upon a finding that the design guidelines and design criteria are met. And the report gets into that in a little bit here. So in some cases, or in many cases, a certificate of appropriateness can be granted administratively for incidental features such as fences. However, the Planning and Housing Director may refer any application to the HPC for approval. The new features being proposed at 802 Burnett Avenue are atypical in characterization, materials, and height, and warrant a review by, we believe, by the HPC. Staff considers the components of the fence to include all of the features, including the extended trellis, piers, posts, and arms. Freestanding elements of a similar nature would likely be classified as landscape accent based upon past precedent. That past precedent would be a determination made by the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So based on the design guidelines and design criteria, any new construction has to be based upon that. So the standards for new construction talk about the materials, talk about the design, talk about the height. So it's important for the commission to understand how they can approve it, if or what is approvable. New construction shall be appropriate height and massing when it's viewed in relation to historic buildings in the district. And just to note that these structures will also be visible from 9th Street, even though it's in the rear yard because of the corner lot, they will be visible. So we talked about the fence height already. In this case, they're proposing a 36-inch high brick hip wall that appears to replicate the foundation height of the historic home and would meet the fence height requirement. The trellis piers and extending posts and arms are integrated into the brick hip wall, should be considered part of the fence structure as well. The piers and posts are proposed to include a base of brick with a vertical beam extending up to 12 feet, with an angled beam extending up to 9 feet in horizontal length. This exceeds the permitted fence height of 6 feet in a rear yard. Under the fence materials, brick is not specifically listed as a permitted fence material, and masonry is permitted for fence post only. However, the use of the brick, I believe, would fall under the category of other fence materials for which historic evidence can be shown that the material has been used historically on properties in the historic district. And as stated by the applicant, the brick that they're intending to use for the wall and grill primarily is salvaged from the porch reconstruction. So it has historically been utilized on the property. The piers of the columns are proposed to utilize the same brick, I believe, that they used for the porch reconstruction. And that would be new brick. The fence design, solid brick is not listed as one of the permitted fence designs. Therefore, the use of solid brick would fall under the category of other fence designs for which historic evidence can be shown that the design has been used historically on properties in the historic district. As a typo. The brick hip wall appears to replicate the foundation of the historic home, and the brick piers and posts appear to replicate elements of the front porch. So staff believes that the design of the brick hip wall is appropriate to the historic nature of the property. The fence location, the entire structure is located 1 foot from the property line, similar to other fences in Old Town and around the city. Fences are allowed to be located within the setback, as previously described, as long as they meet the 6-foot height restriction. A major difference in the porch structure from the proposed fence columns is that the piers and columns of the porch are part of a larger roof structure that's tied into the house, well, also with a balustrade and railing as part of the home's massing. The rear yard fence is detached from the house, with each column reaching a height of 12 feet at the property edge. If the columns are considered part of the fence COA, they cannot exceed 6 feet. The only design guidelines from Section 3115 that apply to those related to new construction are those related to new construction of a fence. There are no specifics in Chapter 31 on how a fence would incorporate Queen Anne style attributes. So that's not a consideration. The applicable requirements of 3115 have been met regarding the fence materials and design, staff believes, but the inclusion of the 3 trellis columns causes the fence to exceed the allowable fence height. The HPC can approve the fence with the stipulation that the 3 trellis columns not exceed 6 feet. Or a finding could be made that the applicable, I'll just read the alternative. I'll jump down to the recommended action. Staff concludes that the proposed patio is exempt from review, but the other features should be categorized as part of the fence, requiring a certificate of appropriateness. I'll just interject at this point. This is really a hard report to write. And the reason it was really hard is because there's a lot of criteria, as you know, in Chapter 31 relating to historic structures and guidelines and criteria and so forth and so on. But as mentioned previously, this is atypical in its design and in its location and in its categorization as a fence even. So I think it's a really good topic relating to Chapter 31, because when staff reviews something like this, all we can go off of is what is said in the code, either in Chapter 31 or in the other parts of the code that also apply, like the zoning ordinance and so forth. So that's what we've tried to do, is as a certificate of appropriateness, a fence does require a review. Typically, fences don't come to you, but in this case, this is so unusual from the standpoint of what's being requested that it's very appropriate to bring you into the discussion and have your input on the final determination. So staff believes that the extended height and location of the large trellis columns that extend up to 12 feet do not meet the intent of the design guidelines for new construction compatibility. And we are recommending alternative 1, but there's several alternatives there. So alternative 1 says the Historic Preservation Commission can issue a certificate of appropriateness to allow the construction of the proposed fence elements with the condition that the height of the fence trellis columns be revised to not exceed 6 feet for any component of the fence. That's our recommendation. So I will conclude there, and I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure there will be interesting dialogue and questions that follow.
So I hope you all had a chance to look at the photos and the plans. Do you have any questions or that you might like to ask Mr. Coles?
I have a staff question. So we're really just reviewing the wall, not the other part of the structure.
Speak up a little bit, Mary Jo. I'm having a hard time hearing.
We're just reviewing the wall, the brick part, and not the wood part of the construction.
No, you are reviewing the all of the components except the patio.
Okay, all that's visible then. it's
And
above
all of
ground.
the components are considered part of the fence.
Okay.
Would you all mind if I came forward a little bit?
Oh, please.
You're just on the edge
Yeah.
of me being able to hear.
Oh, yeah,
Very
no,
hard to hear
absolutely.
sometimes.
Please do.
I'll feel like a student in class who wasn't listening if I. put the questions directly to me
You
and
just
I
want
don't
to
say
escape out the back door, right?
Yes, I have a question. Well, no, I'm not going to say I assume because that's the wrong thing. Is the intent of the wooden trellis arms to have them covered in a vine or greenery?
They may at some point. We may grow it up there. The real intent is just to sort of define a sense of place, not a visual boundary so much as sort of a feeling of a little enclosure, a little, so it doesn't just bleed into the grass next to it. And in looking at these alternatives here, for us, alternative 2.
Can I interrupt a minute? So typically we have the staff present and you ask questions.
Oh,
Then we
Oh,
have the
oh, I'm sorry.
applicant
I'm
present
sorry.
and give his name and address and then ask questions.
thank
So
you.
if you're ready for him to present, I would suggest him to be at the podium and start over with their name and.
Are there
go
any
from
other
there.
staff questions that anyone may have?
Yes, I still
All right,
I
go
have
ahead,
another
Mary
one.
Jo, and then we'll flip to you then.
So we can't really approve the height of the columns, can we, because of the zoning requirement?
Right, if, as part of the fence, they would have to be redesigned as a separate element.
Okay, I'm not clear.
Because the code does, so this entity does not approve any landscape accents. There's nothing in chapter 31 that says you approve landscape accents per se, like other features that somebody may have on their yard. Now, what's interesting is since chapter 31 was written, I don't see any cases of anybody requesting approval for trellis or pergola or anything other than just additions, fences, pretty typical kind of things. So when we rewrote the setback section of the code, we put some language in there about landscape accents that could be put in a setback, like an arbor or something, or a pergola or something like that. But chapter 31 doesn't use those terms and doesn't, the COA approval is for, structures such as buildings or fences. So it might be something that you want to think about as you're talking about chapter 31 too. That's just an aside.
Yes, definitely.
Does that mean that it doesn't have to be redesigned as much as just relabeled? Rather than calling it a fence, we call it one of those other
A
things?
pergola?
Or
It's staff's opinion that given the location and the part that's integral with the hip wall, that it's a fence.
The way I would look at it is it's a new addition to a historic building. So the standard would be that you protect the historic structure, that you don't damage any character defining features. And it should be differentiated and compatible. So those would be the three things that from our review, that's what we should be looking at and not the height. So it's kind of hard to,
Well, but it says under the conditions of approval of new construction that a fence has to meet the height standard
of the zoning code.
of the zoning ordinance.
Okay,
It says that
so
in 31
that's-
and in 29.
Yeah, so that's a given. It's whether if we approved what's proposed, then zoning wouldn't be able to approve that. They'd have to get some kind of a variance or non-conforming, or what would happen if we
I'd
say,
if you, I think if you wanted to, well, I think the options are laid out in the alternatives
mhm,
that are before you tonight. One option would be to have them come back. Another option would be they could, before you do anything, they could take it to the zoning board of adjustment to decide if those larger structures are qualify as an independent feature as a landscape accent. But they would have to go to the zoning board of adjustment for that determination. That's not a determination that's really in chapter 31.
well, yeah, I think,
So what we have to keep going back to is look at the definition, and if it's clear, if it's not clear, it's what we have.
Yes.
All we have to hang our hat on is what chapter 31 says.
right.
at the risk of splitting too many hairs, if this, it clearly says it's not attached to the existing structure.
Right. It's
If
not.
it were, then it would be considered a porch or something? Or then what?
No, I don't. It wouldn't fit the definition of a porch either.
But it would no longer be a fence.
It could be a fence and attached to the structure. To the house, you mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fences sometimes are attached to houses. It could be attached. It's important to recognize it's not attached for the reasons Mary Jo
Right.
stated, because attaching anything to the historic structure could have a detrimental impact to that structure. So the fact that it's not attached, that's very positive. And I mean, that makes it easier for reviewing it and approving it.
I have a question, Eloise. So you say that pergolas and arbors have not been reviewed in Old Town District as of yet, right? No.
There was a review in 2012 of trellis and pergola that was added above a deck.
And
The
what,
code was rewritten in 2015.
oh,
So the code, since the current code, I do not see any submittals for those elements. And as you probably recognize, those terms, the term trellis is not in
No.
chapter 31.
so looking at past review, the outcome of what was the outcome of the decision on the added pergola in 2012?
Well, it was a different code,
It was a different code.
so I
it's
can't
no
really
longer
speak
put-
to that.
Mhm.
I mean, it was approved.
Okay,
I can tell you that, but it was a different review.
right. So in looking at the diagram, it looks like the pillars mimic the pillars on the front porch. And then you have the wood posts on top of the brick pillars that also mimic the pillars on the front porch. And then there's an angled element that could be considered like a pergola or arbor to the top of those wooden piers that could mimic the angle of the porch roof as kind of an echo. As to me, it looks like the patio is an echo of what the front porch is to some degree. But I have a hard time, it's like from the pier, from the brick pier above, could that to me is like landscaping elements, that arm that sticks up over, which could be, as they've got ivy in the diagram, could be covered for privacy and shade, grape leaf or something like that to get some shade on the patio. I'm thinking it seems more like an arbor or a pergola type of element to the top of the fence around the patio. To me, the fencing part is the brick wall and the brick piers. And then we have this other piece that comes up and over that potentially could provide shade to the patio. I don't know. Does anybody else see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because I don't think there's anything on the masonry side that contradicts the height requirement. So it
No,
almost feels like if we approve that piece, we're fine. It's just the above and beyond.
right,
That, yeah, and is that really a fence? Or is that a piece of landscape?
right.
I'm just going to show this for reference.
Oh, good. Oh,
This is from catalog. And that's why definitions are really important, but sometimes visual pictures, as I know you guys like visual pictures too.
Oh, we do.
So this is showing trellises.
Yes.
A trellis always has a vertical, always has kind of a structure above. It's not a roof because it's open,
Right.
but it's a connecting beams.
Right.
This is showing what they're calling lattices. Some people would call this a trellis,
Right.
but I think technically a trellis needs to have the overhead. So this could be a trellis. That could also be, that really would be more of a pergola.
Right.
But I like the fact they're calling these lattices. I thought that was a good term. But
Well,
we found in writing the code that arbor and pergola sometimes are interchangeable.
Right.
But in the setback, there is a limitation for arbors of 15 square feet, but the incidental landscape accents or features, the ZBA determined that 15 square feet, I think their determination was that didn't necessarily apply. So I don't know if any of that helps, but
If you flip back to the pergola picture,
Yeah, the previous one on the top, is that what you're looking at, where it has the stone wall? It kind of
Right.
reminds me very much of what we're
right,
looking at
it echoed very closely,
Probably attached.
which to me would be, if I were doing a patio in my backyard, which I have done, and I put up a pergola in my backyard, but it's because
This
I
one?
want shade.
Nope, the middle one, the second page that you showed us.
Flip her over,
Yeah,
yeah.
flip that one over maybe, and it was at the top. Had a stone wall.
was it this one?
Nope.
I'm sorry. Oh, this one.
Bingo.
Voila, that's it.
This one is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Kind of reminds me, yeah.
where it
it's-
has a base with columns, and then although they did a trellis kind of pattern on the top, it could be open pergola, where we would just have the cross beams, which this is a very simplified half pergola, basically to me, that could provide shade to a patio.
Our patio under question, what is the patio material itself? Is it concrete or stone?
Stone is what they've said in their
Is
application.
that already laid? It's already there?
No.
So do we have any other staff questions, or is this is trying to get some understanding of what we're looking at here?
Right.
If not, maybe we could have Dan kind of tell his description of what you guys are. State your name and address and information, and we'll, yeah, go right ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Dan Colts. I live at 802 Burnett Avenue. I think everything that I've heard so far is absolutely correct in terms of what we wanted to do, what it's supposed to look like, echoing the porch on the front of the house, disconnected so it doesn't harm the historicity of the original building, same sort of materials, but obviously not 1910 constructed. Trying to stick with all of that. In our minds, it was not a fence. I see that might meet the technical definition of a fence. To us, the trellis and the columns are pretty integral. We actually thought for several years we couldn't decide what to do. So we were really excited when we have this. If it doesn't work exactly right, that's okay. We can modify. But what I was going to say a little bit earlier is that the trellis part is so important to the sense of place we wanted to create that we would, if we couldn't have it as drawn, we would want the trellis pieces and we would disconnect those from the wall so they become garden pertinences or whatever the landscape accents, so that they could be classed as that, so we could still get that sense of place to the patio. I don't know that I had anything else that I wanted to say, but obviously, if you guys have questions about materials or thoughts or different ways that we could build it.
So the enclosing of the patio and the brick piers are going to be made from original brick from the house?
To the extent we can, yeah.
To the extent that you can? Okay. So it should match that whole
Yeah, we definitely have enough for the south wall, the one that faces
street.
the street. And then if we don't quite have enough for the other, maybe we'll do facing, and then the interior bricks will be different. It's tough to say. The salvage bricks are pretty good quality in and of themselves. Prior owners had used proper materials, lime mortar sometimes, which is weak enough to chip away and reuse. Sometimes they concreted them together, and it's a little bit of a mix. So we're not totally certain how many bricks will come out. Definitely enough for the south side, but
Right.
question on these.
Well, the angle of the landscaping part, the trellis piece, will that be at the same degree or angle of the front porch?
It's supposed to match the mud room in back better.
I
I don't
see,
think it
that
matches
one.
exactly the front
Yes.
porch.
Now I see in the second picture. Okay. So it has the same, something that basically is kind of following as a pattern, right?
Yep, the garage and mudroom there. It's supposed to
The
integrate more
garage
with
and the
some closer.
side structure, okay.
And this might be a quirk of their rendering software, but it almost looks like each post has a different angle. Supposed to be parallel to each other?
Same angle. Each post, as they go back, the trellis, the horizontal part, is thicker.
Oh.
So it gives a little. So that's definitely something that we want to achieve with that design.
Okay. Oh, I see, yeah. Good eye. I didn't see it.
Mhm.
See how they stick out.
Yeah, it's kind of a, okay.
I don't know that it matters a whole lot, but can you tell me how those uprights will be constructed, especially the angle on top?
Ah, yes,
The light
yes, we
bulb
can.
or-
So, best design right now. My brother-in-law works for one of the 3D modeling companies, so we had him do up a thing. Best design right now is it's got a bolt through the center of the diagonal horizontal piece, sitting on a steel structure on top of the base, and we had that modeled, and that provides more than enough both long stability and side-to-side stability.
That's my next question, is the side to side. Okay, thank you.
Eloise, can I ask you a question again? If
Are we done with him?
Oh,
no, I wanted. Well, do you want to finish with?
does anybody have any other further questions of Dan? We can come back to Dan, I think.
Yeah,
if we need to.
I'd like to make a comment. I think this is difficult. It's really hard to to evaluate an addition to a historic building, and all of the issues are here. But it is completely detached. I thought at first that the wall was just detached or attached to the foundation, but it's not. It's completely separate, as I understand it. It has a modern look to it. It has, I mean, it definitely differentiates from the historic character of the neighborhood and the house. So, and I think that's good. So, it's very difficult to do that. And it's just hard to tell in a drawing. I think it can look really, really good in when it's actually constructed, and the materials, but it's really hard to tell in the drawing. To me, it seems awkward and out, not really in character with the historic buildings, like a flat roof pergola over the patio would be. I think that is more closely to a historic concept for an addition, but then I like the differentiation part of the standards. So I do like the way this is done, and I think I think the quality of the construction is really going to make or break whether it is compatible and it really fits within the district. So I think that would be my comment. Something to think about.
Yeah, thanks.
So.
I have one other further comment, is in looking at the photos of the house, you have contrasting white paint around the windows, the window trims, and along the edge boards of the siding. So adding on the patio with the enclosed area and then the post element, the posts in the diagram are white, which also mimic the trim color of the house. So I'm thinking it might not be quite as eye-popping, that it's, oh my God, this is really different, as it would kind of blend in to a certain degree. Also, I hope that you can get some good grapevine or something growing on that because you'll need the shade. You'll want that.
That would be fantastic to be able to reach up and grab a grape.
Oh, don't you know?
Well, that's kind of what I'm putting my mind in, thinking, what would Ted say? Right. And I think that Ted would be very much for this project for that. He always advocated that we wanted Old Town to be livable, that we want to maintain the historic integrity, but yet we want people to be able to live there.
Right.
And that I think that the use of materials and that, again, mimicking the foundation height, mimicking the porch support, that mimicking these things, it is going to be modern and it's going to make the house more livable. And yet it's honoring, I think, with the materials and these ideas that it's the right, that it's a good design.
So if we have any further comments for
Just to say that I really like how it reflects the porch with the pillars, and that I think it's really very effective.
yeah.
And if I understand correctly, I mean that the screening, the pergola portion of this is so important to the homeowners that if we were to reject the height, the entire wall might go. I mean, the entire wall might not ever be built, and instead they might have to go to something, some other kind of plan.
Supplemental.
Right. And that, so I guess in my feeling is that, do we reuse the bricks? Do we kind of honor this design that tries to replicate, historic, or if we reject it, none of that gets done, and then something else that we wouldn't be able to, and we wouldn't have any say in, a pergola design. So I mean, I guess it kind of puts us between a rock.
It sounds like we're kind of at the point where we need to review the recommendations, the recommended
Mhm.
actions. So let's go to that section. Staff was supporting alternative, which one? One, I
Yeah.
believe, correct?
Yes.
Supporting alternative one. Let's look at, there's 4 alternatives. Let's look at those and see what seems. Alternative 1 is that we can issue a certificate of appropriateness to allow the construction of the proposed fence elements with the condition that the height of the fence trellis columns be revised to not exceed the 6 feet for any component of the fence, which would basically kneecap that top part, right?
Right.
Would take off that, okay.
So,
Then the other choices are, number 2, we can direct the applicant to detach the extended features from the fence and have them reviewed as landscape accents. We could then approve the certificate of appropriateness for the brick, the fence, the enclosing part, which would be the low hip wall and the brick grill. Our third choice is that we can deny approval of the certificate of appropriateness to allow the construction as presented. Or final choice is that we can refer this request back to city staff and the applicant for additional information, such as a new design for the 3 trellis columns. So I think we're kind of between a modified 1 and a 4. Really.
yeah, I have a question of
Sure.
staff on the second one.
Okay.
So that says that we could just review the portion of the brick structure that conforms to the zoning code.
Right, number 2.
And,
would
and
allow
and then they would have to come back with another application and redesign the,
Well, they would have to resubmit something that shows if they wanted to proceed with the extended features, they would have to, under number 2, they would have to resubmit something showing that it's not part of the fence.
Of the fence, okay.
So they would have to, and even with number one, they would need to submit something showing if they were gonna do some kind of column that it won't exceed 6 feet. So those details aren't really here, but they could provide that as part of those approvals. The fourth one could also include if they wanted to take it to the zoning board of adjustment for determination and then come back to you. That's also could be part of number 4 when you refer it back to the city staff or to the applicant. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, but it poses other questions.
Okay.
And I'd like to ask the applicant, would it work to reduce the columns, the brick columns? Okay,
No,
that's
They,
what I was
they wouldn't
wondering.
look right. We would never do them that way.
Well, and I'm wondering about support too, for the whole structure. If,
It'd be so low, I'd hit my head as I walked underneath them. If they could only be 6 foot tall, because that would be to like the top of the diagonal portion, which would mean like 5 foot next to the columns, and then 6 foot when I was over here. So we just wouldn't build them like that if number 1 was the option.
but your wood post on top of that column would raise,
As I understand, number 1, we couldn't have a wood post on top of that column.
oh,
The
okay.
6 feet would goes from the base of the brick wall to 6 feet up.
Yeah, the terminology here, trellis columns intended to encompass the whole brick, pier, post, and arms. The
So,
term column meant to include all of that.
So the height of the brick pier is approximately from base to top is about how much? 5 feet?
I believe so.
It's actually, I think,
Is it
6 feet.
6 feet?
More
6
than
feet
6
just to the
feet,
top of
what you
the
said.
brick pier.
Can we go back?
It
And
says
the
in the, it's 6 feet 2 inches capped with 4 inches of concrete for the pier portion without the white post.
Without,
And then the white post, my understanding that you're saying that the entire structure has a height of 12 feet with the pier and the post.
Yes.
Yeah,
That-
okay,
that sounds
that's how I
right.
read that.
So what is the height limit we're dealing with?
6 feet.
6
fence.
feet for a
Fence.
for a fence.
For a fence, but not a trellis.
We don't have trellis.
Doesn't
in
have
that.
any
Yeah.
regular 20-foot trellises.
it has to be, the application has to be for a landscape feature
Right.
for us to review it as that the only way I can see us approving the project as submitted is to approve it at the height it is and make a recommendation that zoning approve the non-conformance, or is that,
You would have to have the zoning board of adjustment determine that the taller elements would not be considered part of the fence,
Ah, that's what I was looking for.
that they would be considered landscape action.
A landscape action.
And then if they decided that, then it could actually be a staff approval at that point for the other part of the fence.
But we're still.
Or it could come back to you if you wanted.
But with the concrete pad on top, we're still higher than 6 feet.
The concrete, the piers are 6 feet, 6 inches with the concrete on top.
The brick piers.
The brick piers without the white part.
And the white part, the construction is such that it has a beam that goes through the brick pier.
Probably,
Support,
probably,
right?
yeah, probably
To
steel
stabilize
clad and
the-
wood.
The
Yeah.
pier.
uh,
But new owner, whatever, down the road could cut off the white part if they felt like they didn't like that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it would still stand as, okay. So So this, to me, is like an additional feature of the landscaping piece, basically, that's been applied to the top of the enclosed wall.
But the wall itself is still higher than 6 feet if we're including the.
The
Yeah.
cap.
Yeah. 6
What-
inches.
I mean, I would think that a lot of those height requirements,
Dirty dirt on the bottom, make the wall short.
well,
Yeah.
and a lot of that has, to me, like the setback and the height requirement really has to do with like visibility.
Right.
That's really what, but we're not looking at, there's no alleyway access behind it. You're not really blocking anything. I mean, I would think that this would be a really good exception, that if you're going to make an exception, or if an
Right.
exception should be allowable, this should be it. That, we're, is it a fence? Is it not a fence? Is it hardscaping, landscaping? That this would be a candidate to me, just to have the whole, just to.
All in one piece.
Yeah, to be considered all in one piece and all, and all, well, what do I mean, to be made an exception of?
Okay, so how do we make a motion here then that gets that across? Because it sounds like we would like it to be kept all in one piece as a patio wall with a landscape element. Pretty much. So do we refer this back to staff? What would be the way to do this, Eloise? If we say, within our purview of certificate of appropriateness, we can say, we see.
As is.
As
designed,
is.
That we make a certificate of approval for it as it's designed, and then request that zoning give this an exception and pass it.
Is
I
that,
think
Do
it
we have
has
to
to, I don't think you can approve the COA until you get the exception.
Okay.
okay,
And then once that goes,
That's
we
my
have to be bound
understanding.
by their.
So that would be number 4.
Do we have to delineate what we're calling what within here? If we're calling that a feature and
Well,
whatever else?
let me
So
ask
they
you,
know what we mean?
yeah, let me ask this. When we make a recommendation back, can our recommendation say, we see that it is appropriate?
Well, I think it would be the applicant submitting to the ZBA. It wouldn't be the HPC submitting to ZBA.
Okay,
I
I
think.
think I understand that.
So they would make those arguments, and they can say in their application that it went to the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay, good. I was going to say, certainly our comments
Seal
and
of
our,
approval.
yeah,
For
our comments and our review of the photos and the plans and stuff like that would go along with the information to the Board of Adjustment, right? Okay,
Well, in that case, can I add one more
sure.
positive observation? When you look at the one with the house and the nature of the house with the different level roofs and the different gables, or they may not be called gables, the nature of the Queen Anne house, it would absolutely fit in there. It's just yet another sort of, thing of the lines. So that isn't very, if you could quote that, thing of the lines.
Okay. I'll make a
Would you like to
motion.
make a motion for us?
Yes.
good stab at this?
I'll make a good stab at it. I move that we approve the design based on our finding that the project meets the guidelines and standards of the code. And then I don't know that we need to make a recommendation about it going to Board of Zoning Appeals, because it would have to anyway if we approve it. Is that correct?
We would not.
I don't
be-
believe you can approve it as
We
it
can't.
is based on staff alternatives.
We cannot give it a certificate of appropriateness based on the ordinance as
Okay.
it stands.
I think we have to continue it then until they get the
If they
zoning approval.
continue it, we would get to say about the fencing part, but not about the beams, correct? That would be the part that someone else would be reviewing?
The ZBA would review to make a determination if it is considered a landscape accent that is independent from the fence.
Okay. So it sounds like, based on the ordinance as it stands, we have to decide to deny a certificate of appropriate.
No, you don't deny it, you refer it back to staff
Refer it back to
or
staff.
to the applicant. You don't want to
Okay.
deny it.
So I was gonna say, but we can't, if we refer it back, we just say our comments, but then it goes to a different route, right?
Right,
For approval.
right.
Okay.
It goes to them for their determination, and then based on their determination, we'll then see if staff can go ahead and approve the COA. Probably, assuming they approve it, then I think we could just do a quick staff review, wouldn't even have to come back to you.
Okay,
Okay.
so with our comments,
Okay, then I have to change the motion.
certainly, please.
So the motion would be to refer it back to staff? Is that what
It's
you said?
number 4.
Number 4.
Alternative 4.
Would be number 4, okay. I move that we refer this request back to the city staff. And the applicant, is that worded correctly?
Well, it says additional information, which would be the information.
Oh, for additional
from the
information, okay.
ZBA.
Okay, I move that we refer this request back to city staff and the applicant for additional information.
And
That's
to
it.
include the comments from the historic preservation.
Well, the applicant would submit whatever they want to submit, and they
Okay.
could include those comments.
Okay,
It would be up to them to make the
You
submittal.
took lots of notes, right?
I would.
Okay.
Just go back and watch the
all right.
recording.
So we have a motion at the table. Do we have any seconds for the motion? We have one.
I'm
abstention.
happy to second.
So moved and second that we follow the recommendation, alternative number 4, to refer the request back to city staff and to the applicant for additional information for review. And there we
Should
are.
we vote? Do we need to vote?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was moved and seconded.
Okay.
Yeah, is there any more discussion?
Or is that, do we need to vote or do we move in second? I thought that was the motion.
Yeah,
There
then
can-
you have to vote.
All right,
Or
now we
there
have to
or there
vote.
can be
All right,
discussion.
there we go. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved.
I'm abstaining.
Any further discussion?
Um,
We should really discuss before we vote.
Yeah, you're supposed to discuss before the vote.
All right.
Right
well,
after the
I think
motion,
we
but
did.
that's fine.
I think we
Well, we
did.
discussed enough.
We
That's
discussed
why I didn't-
enough.
That's why I didn't push
Yeah,
it.
Thank
but-
you. So,
All right.
Okay.
anything else further? All right, I think you
Thank
can
you.
escape. Yeah.
Thank you all. Home
Thank
for me
you
to make
for-
for my daughter.
For answering all our questions.
Oh, thank you for the kind words. It's great to know that you like the look of it. You work
It looks awesome,
you
yeah.
work on something long enough, you kind of lose perspective, and you're like, don't know anymore.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
the
much.
pictures all helped. They really did.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Okay. I'll get the hang of this.
Yeah, we have plenty of discussion.
Oh, yeah, we did. Okay. So we're up to item number 6. The review of chapter 31's section 31, 7 through 9, which we had. Let's see here. I put some of the information in a, basically just transcribed it into a table format, just those 3 sections, 7, 8, and 9, so that it might be easier to read. And I included the editing comments from the original edited document, which primarily Ted and Mary Jo. And then I did not have the staff comments, so those are separate. I think you got a handout about the staff comments to go along, to respond to the editing versions.
Oh, could I overlook yours? Because I didn't get one. Yes.
So there we have it. So should we kind of follow through like we did the last time, kind of each section? Section 31.7 is titled Consideration for Nomination Criteria for Landmark Designation. And as you can see, there were some changes noted for clarity's sake. And then the staff remarked for this particular title, the change recognizes a separate criteria for a historic district versus a historic landmark. So,
Yeah, and I think that, I agree with that. That needs to be in the title,
right.
the criteria for historic district or landmark designation.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll make a note of that. Okay.
I don't know if you want me
Any
to talk
other-
that or not. But
No, I'll be. Any other remarks on the beginning of the section? Okay, so moving to number 1. Before an area which contains contiguous parcels can be designated as a historic district, the proponents of the district include the following. And then it has A through E, I think. Right, A through E as the sub sections of the outline. These are the proponents. As you can see, there was a recommendation for a subsection I, 3, I, and then what is it? Properties embodying the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of, and then striking new, method of construction that would represent the work of a master, possess high artistic values, represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction, or. So the only thing that was edited was the striking the new to make it more inconsistent with the national criteria.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
Back on the number 1,
sure,
where you're striking diverse ownership,
yes.
is that addressed somewhere else? The reason I'm asking is it could be misunderstood to mean that the contiguous parcels have to be owned by one person. I think that striking diverse ownership in that sentence probably makes sense, but I guess the question is is the topic of diverse ownership addressed anywhere else?
I don't think so. Haven't seen it.
Because I think it might be helpful to make sure it's understood. It could be a single property owner or it could be diverse property owners. But we can
Well,
come back to that later
Okay.
as we get through it if
Yeah.
you like.
The only thing is, that's nowhere in like this, the national standards. It's just contiguous properties that I think, it's been a long time since I've looked at it, but I don't recall seeing that at all.
Well, we can come back to that
We
question
can come
later
back to
Well,
that duly
as we
noted.
get through it more.
Don't you want to discuss it?
We can discuss it a little
I mean-
further if anybody.
I mean, otherwise, I would say of a single ownership or diverse ownership. But I think it's clear that it's contiguous parcels, period. That it doesn't have to, the ownership doesn't really have anything to do with whether or not it's a
I
district.
see. So it's the ownership piece
Yeah,
that you're remarking on.
right. I don't see that.
And
Because if you have of diverse ownership, then you can't do contiguous properties that are owned by the same person. if it's a district.
Contiguous means they're next to each other.
Yes.
So what were you saying? Say it again.
You could have contiguous properties that were owned by the same person.
Right.
And if you put this of diverse ownership, that eliminates that being a possibility.
I see what you're saying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think the intent of the term is to mean it can be either one, but
Well, I think,
but you're right. It could be misconstrued to say,
that's what I,
yeah.
that's
I
what
Make
I,
it too specific, then you have to stay specific. And you don't want to do that.
Why don't we just keep that in the back of our minds and we can come back to that
okay.
as we
Okay.
get through more of this.
That might be a legal question too, if we get that far.
So the sub areas below the number one are the criteria of what you would look at to see what would be make it relevant for a nomination. The properties are significant, possess integrity. C, we added, there was some added language in the editing. A minimum of 66% of the principal structures in the proposed district are contributing buildings or structures. So just the buildings would be, adding buildings would be added to C, is the editing.
You're on C?
On C,
So I would just say for clarification that in our code, a structure is a building. I mean, a building is a structure, but a structure is not necessarily a building. So by saying structures, it would include buildings.
okay, so it's a duplication, you're saying of a, all right, so that's.
And I would call attention to the word principal, because we also have in C where it says 66% of the principal structures,
Mhm.
because some of the structures, so if you look at just the definition of structure, structure can also include a garage or a fence, and those things would not be considered principal structures. They would be accessory structures.
Exactly.
Just
Yeah.
so I think principal structure is important, but then I personally don't think you need to add buildings, because I think it's already
Okay,
part of that definition.
Oh, okay.
based on the definitions already in the ordinance, right? So in D, we have a similar thing where we have contributing buildings and structures are a minimum of 50 years old. So that's kind of the same thing, whether we're duplicating language. But
Yeah, I mean, you could have a district that has, say, a bridge or something in it. So you still want to include structure, buildings and structures.
okay,
Well, do we need the word buildings though, just like in the previous line?
to be consistent with C, we just
principal
talked about if we,
Structures is a broader term than building.
the broader,
Yeah,
something to consider for,
And then as
we
long
just probably need to make sure the definition, in the definition section, that structures includes everything.
as we're
Okay.
on D, in the little note in the margin list, that's not typically included. I don't know what the state standards are, but do we need to include that line about being 50 years old? Or maybe we strike the whole thing.
Well, if it's not 50 years old, it has to be of exceptional significance,
But according to who,
the,
what?
the
what?
national standards. So just as a guideline for a district, usually you may have buildings of different age, and the only way you could include a newer structure in that is if there was an exceptional reason to do that.
Does
So
our code allow for an exception also?
I don't think.
Because having this line in here doesn't sound like it. You know, if we already have to have an exception for the,
I think, don't we have
I
some structures
think-
that are less than 50 that are included as landmarks?
I don't think so. No, I think it has to be 50 years old in the,
So the question is, in our code now, do we have anything that allows something less than 50 years old?
Right,
Well, apparently not.
okay,
mm-mm.
okay,
And that's what's in there currently,
right.
is the 50.
Yeah, that's the. that's
I'm just
the-
wondering if we should strike the whole thing. We do-
No,
No, probably not a good idea, no.
Okay.
and then E, which is in the original, is recommended to strike entirely. The proposed district is less than 160 acres or more than 2 acres inside.
Yeah.
Just the size restrictions have been recommended to be deleted.
Staff had a question about that.
Mhm.
Right. So the staff question is, explain why the size limitation for a historic district that ranges from the minimum of 2 acres to a maximum of 160 is being removed. So why do we want to take that out?
I don't know why it's in there. I don't understand why there's a limit on either end. Is that a zoning thing for zoning overlay?
Well, it says the city council may waive the limitation of 160 acres.
But what if it's less than 2 acres?
Then I think it would be more of a landmark status
Not
of a property,
necessarily.
but
Yeah,
2 acres is something I know that's typical in the zoning ordinance for other things, other considerations as a minimum, which don't necessarily carry over to this, but it might be why it says 2 acres, with the idea that it has enough acreage to, either it's a landmark as an important property in and of itself, or it has enough bulk to substantiate being a district. But do you have examples, Mary Jo, of districts that were
well,
involved as a couple of small parcels?
I mean, I know it's possible if you're using National Register standards, that if it's not if you have 2 parcels, 2 separate parcels of contributing buildings, and they contribute to one another, it's a district. So it could be less than 2 acres. That's just a possibility.
And in that case, you don't think it would be a landmark
It
necessarily?
wouldn't be a landmark because it would not be a single property. A landmark would be a single property.
So was your concern about both being more than 160 acres and
no,
less than 2
if-
acres?
It was just the lower number that I was concerned
The 2
about,
acre?
that you maybe
More than 2
would,
acres?
yeah.
I think
If-
that's a good question. I mean, we can,
I mean, I think the 160 acre is, how big is that? Like compared to the district that we're surveying now, how many acres is that? Do we know?
I don't remember.
Okay. I don't think I have a problem with it having to have,
Okay, so it was
waiver.
the limitation being more than 2 acres.
mhm,
It was the
yeah,
concern.
that's the main. I don't really see a reason for limiting it to 160 acres either, because in some instances, a whole city becomes a historic district and can become a historic district. Like
But this is for a local ordinance.
I know, but I think we have to use the guidelines that are available to us rather than,
So in section 1, well, section 7 here, the first one is the description of the district. all the criteria for a district. Do we need size limitations for districts? Do we need a minimum and a maximum for districts, do you think?
I don't see any reason for it.
What's the general?
I guess well, I'm not sure. I don't really
Significance
have
should
the
determine
history
size.
to know.
Yeah.
That might be something Ray can share more on.
I-
Although he was just asking what was the reasoning behind removing that. So,
Yeah, well, those are, that, that's pretty much it, is that it just limits it where it maybe we shouldn't be limiting it in either direction. Or if it's not necessary, if it's a matter of staff management, I don't know. That's why it was put in there. Like, it's not worth it doing unless it's at least 2 acres or,
maybe.
and if
I
it
don't
gets
know.
above 160, it's too much or.
It seems like it's one of those things that we're getting into, like very much the building requirements and zoning kind of things, where it's very, very necessary to have very specific, feet and setbacks and stuff like that. But when you're talking about historic determinations where it may be irregular boundaries, it may be irregular number of elements and stuff like that, it's very difficult to maybe put a specific size limitation on a proposed district.
That's what.
And if we had in the future some landscaping kind of situation, something like that, I mean, I would say that the more defining characteristic of a district will be the relatable significance of the features, the physical features to the history of why we want to preserve an area. Not so much that it's defined by, how many feet, square feet.
Size limits.
Right.
Hey, Joe, I found your number. Old Town is 47 acres.
There you go.
Old Town is okay.
Good job.
It's
So
pretty-
that
it's
might be
pretty small.
something to I think that's the thinking behind it from the historic perspective of looking at the Chapter 31 ordinance.
Okay.
Good question, though. Okay. Any further comments on this first
Yes.
part about a district? Go ahead.
Yeah, on that line D again about the minimum, do we have anywhere in here that allows for an exception or like a means by which we would figure that out?
I think sometimes if it can have historic significance, be less than 50.
Well, right, but I'm just saying, do we have a way to?
Do we have that in the ordinance? I don't think we do.
No, there's nothing, there's no way for a local designation to be of something that's less than 50 years old.
It could have relevance.
There's National Register guidelines for that, but no local
No longer.
Gotcha. Okay.
guidelines.
So we want to keep any comment? Do you see that? Okay. So we go to the second, number 2 part, which is about landmarks, about individual. Before, let's see here. Change to before a building, structure, or site is designated as a landmark, the following criteria. And it has 2 elements, A and B, below it. And so, again, we have the language of building and structure as describing a landmark. So do we want to be consistent throughout here as far as maybe that's that thing we need to look at? What is the definition of structure? And
I found it.
Understand that.
I
Where
found
is it?
It is.
Thank
Okay.
you, Edie.
I know, I've been bouncing back and forth. Structure is defined. Number 31, structure. For the purposes of this ordinance, a structure is defined as a fence, garage, accessory building, or house.
Mhm.
So accessory building, there's no comma between those two. So, yeah, I don't know if we want to
No,
read.
it's not, structure limits it then to things other than the primary building,
Yeah.
so. yeah.
Right. And what about a building downtown that's not a house?
Nope.
No,
Right.
right.
No, it's not.
So,
So I think
yeah,
it has to say
that,
building
the
or structure.
definitions have to be brought up to
Yeah, it has to be
date
both.
too.
The structure does not specify building, only
Mhm.
accessory building
Mhm.
or house. And boy, we
Again, I
need,
think a lot of this was written in light of the Old Town Historic District
Mhm.
in many, many ways. Okay. So, building, so
Edie,
far.
where did you, excuse me,
Sure.
where did you just get that from?
that is in section 31.2 definitions.
Okay.
And
Oh,
it
in the,
currently is number 31.
Right.
And the existing one as of today, number 31.
Yeah.
It's the section that we looked at in May, which now seems like a million years
Yeah, yeah.
ago.
So,
You know,
yeah, and
But,
Now, hold on.
I
Let me
think
just
in my
about this.
edits, I wasn't proposing changing that definition, so that's kind of why you need to use both building and
Right,
structures
right.
in this.
Mhm.
But,
if we want this consistency. of the
so we either
language.
need to change the definitions or,
Right,
keep
because
in-
then we actually have a definition for accessory building.
Right.
Any structure having a roof supported by columns or walls for shelter, support, or enclosure of persons, animals, or chattels, which is subordinate to, detached from, but located on the same lot as the principal building. Right, so do we have a definition of principal building? LMNOP, we do not.
No, I
LMNOP,
don't
no.
think we do.
You might want to read the one for contributing structures while you're reading the
Oh,
definitions too, because we're mainly talking about contributing.
Contributing structures, structures establishing the architectural character of the
Number 9.
area.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, the numbering's all off.
I know. Now, I'm using the original one, so
Yeah,
I
you
don't
need the
have the
original, yeah,
edited
I don't have the
numbers,
original.
but I can find
I
it.
think I changed that.
Yeah, we
on
did.
that. That's been edited, so yeah.
Was-
But we do need to look at the definitions when we get through
I
the
think
whole thing,
sometimes
because I think there's.
Now
gonna
that
be-
we're using these definitions.
I think we're
like-
gonna be finding
I'll
other
go back and
places that
reference.
there may be terms we want to add
Right, right.
as well.
Mhm.
So there's 2 sub areas under that description on what a landmark can be determined, the criteria for a landmark. There were some editing recommendations for clarity, that they are significant in national, state, or local history, architecture, landscape architecture, archaeology, culture, and must satisfy one or more of the following criteria. And those are the small Roman numerals I through 4. Any discussion on those? Those, I think, pretty much are standing kind of as is in their description of landmark criteria. And then no one has any comment on that part. Part B in the criteria that a landmark possess integrity of location, design, setting materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. Again, word changes for clarity. No more discussion about that? That would basically end our review of section 31.7. And then we go to the procedures. Now, we are living and walking the walk right now on the procedure. Section 31.8, procedures for designation of a historic district or landmark. Primarily, the survey that we received the grant for is following a lot of the language that is in this part of the ordinance. So in section 31A, you have section 1 and 2. And in the first part, the designation of a historic district may only be proposed by an owner or owners of property within the area for which the designation is requested. Any such proposal shall be filed with the Planning and Housing Department upon the prescribed form and shall include the following. And then that says A through H, I believe. And while we're doing the survey on behalf of the owners, basically based on some historic review that was done a few years ago by Will Page. We're doing an intensive survey that the information will be presented to, kind of blending some information, but we will be presenting this information to the neighborhood. So they will know, have an idea of what we find, and really some interesting stuff is coming out. This is good. So the kinds of things that we'll need to be part of a submission is a map showing the assessor's plat, showing the area and boundary, photographs and other descriptive material, the list of the property owners, the narrative. And again, these are items that are all in when you're doing the intensive survey, part of the forms that are filled out to describe the structures and the land within the district. And then documentation that indicates the structure in the proposed districts are a minimum of 50 years old, and that a minimum of 66% are contributing to the historic nature of the neighborhood. And then it was added, I think, petition with the signature of the majority of property owners that support the district designation. Now, there's comments on the side about the clarity and changing of words, and let's see, and then the staff comments, let's see here.
I have a question
Sure.
about,
Section,
at the very beginning. And
right,
it's
what,
kind of just a question, probably for you and for the city council. It says that it may only be proposed by an owner or owners of property within the area.
right.
Would you want to include that the city council could initiate the district without the property owners actually being the ones to request it?
Ooh, I don't know.
Maybe that's something to ponder. I mean, we do allow the city council has allowed within the writing of rezoning that they can rezone, they can initiate a rezoning. They do want to hear from everybody, always, 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 at least while I've been here. But they also do have the authority to initiate something. So maybe that's just a question to ponder and come back to later.
Initiate, not designate, right? Yeah, that was my hookup. I was just like, ooh,
Well,
but
yeah.
yeah, if it's initiate, and then of course they get the owner's input, then that would
Well, in
make sense.
some ways, we're doing that by, we requested the grant on behalf of the city.
Mhm.
Because the initial survey was as part of our preservation plan that the council has accepted. And in that preservation plan, they identified several areas that could have potential district potential. So what we're doing is following up on that, and we reckon, so in some ways, we are initiating. It's not something the property owners.
Well, what a possibility would be that if with a survey we found that made a finding that it's eligible for the National Register, then this city, the commission could make a recommendation maybe to city council that they recommend designation, National Register designation, that you wouldn't have to have any property owners. You wouldn't have to have a majority of the property owners for that National Register nomination to proceed. And what would happen if you went through that process, the property owners have to be notified that that there's a listing, a National Register listing being reviewed, and they can comment on it. And if there's a majority that object to it, then it's not officially listed, it's just determined eligible for listing. So you have you have a designation that gives some protection from federal properties. So that's a possibility of that happening. So you could put that in the ordinance that that allows a district to be, for the city council to, I don't know, that's kind of a situation that maybe would never happen, but it's.
Well, I think the whole purpose of the preservation plan and to identify areas of potential significance that are already standing, so the city council has already adopted this preservation plan
Right.
as part of their body of purview. It would make sense that they could nominate some of these identified areas upon intensive survey that have been determined to have substantial contributing factors, that make it a worthwhile national landmark district. But again, the whole teeth of preservation really lies at the local level. Until we adopt a district as a local ordinance, none of this stuff applies to any federally identified district. So I could say it would be worthwhile to acknowledge that we have these areas, because sometimes people don't realize what they have in their own backyard until it's brought forth. And the fact that we've already acknowledged in our plan that there are these areas or structures of significance to go ahead and allow us to pursue intensive surveys to potentially nominate. Now, again, we want to bring along the people who live in these areas. This is where we get further into the weeds here. We get down into this other part, like H, petition with the signature of majority of property owners that support the district designation. If we want to make it a local landmark, but we don't need that for a
No,
a national.
we don't. No.
So maybe we need something that, or do we?
Well, you talk about bringing the property owners along. I think Eloise's idea of maybe having the council have that ability kind of gives them some
Incentive or whatever?
interest or just possibility. I mean, I can't see it happening, but it knows.
Well,
It would
we're
be-
potentially doing that right now.
Yes, yeah.
We actually are doing this right now by
Right.
having an intensive survey on behalf of the city council.
But then on
But
the,
I think, the ordinance, if the ordinance revisions go through, the city council's going to be involved in that. And I think that, like I say, it gives them some skin in the game, I guess you would say.
Right.
That even though they are temporary, having it written in a city document that's approved, I don't think that's a bad idea to do that.
Well, we say in A that part of it, to be designated, they have to be significant and national, which could be the federal level
Mhm,
of recognition,
mhm.
state or local, which I don't know if you have something that's a state recognized thing, but not local. I guess you can,
Yeah,
but it wouldn't have.
it's a different well,
And
usually.
then the local.
Yeah, usually if you do National Register nominations, they're automatically listed on the state register.
Right.
So,
So when we get down to this procedures part, so we want to add that the city can maybe
I think that we're looking at the proposal
a proposal, right?
or initiation, because number one, that's what it's talking about, may only be proposed.
Right. It may be proposed. So it could be proposed, right,
mhm,
by city council. Or,
yeah. I think that's something maybe we
okay.
could discuss later. And
Yeah,
I don't think it's a.
And then all of the other information is pretty much the verification of the district or the landmark is indeed verified. So then we get down to H, the petition with the signature of majority of property owners.
Staff comments had a good point
Yep.
about changing that to a petition
Yes,
by owners
here.
of the majority of the property.
Right.
And I think that we were concerned about the word petition, and I think maybe we were looking at that word differently than you were looking at it when you were you thinking basically an application?
I think majority of the properties is more appropriate.
Right, but the word petition,
It's the petition word.
we would use that word to mean something other than an application. We would use that meaning like where you go around and get all the neighbors to sign.
Okay, yeah, change that. What would be a good word? Just
Application of, or a,
and the application.
You could even use the word documentation again, I think.
right.
Is that separate than the proposal itself? Or is that
I
one of
think
the
it
same?
is the proposal. It's part of the proposal.
It would be part of the proposal. It would be one of the
But if, but
prescribed pieces of
so you didn't have that in
documentation.
there before, right?
No.
About the majority of the
No,
property.
it's not there.
So just documentation that a majority of property owners support would that work? Documentation that a majority of property owners that support the district, that a majority
We wanted the majority of the properties.
of the properties, yeah.
Of the
If it's
properties.
added, we would want it to be the majority of properties, not the
Yeah.
majority of property owners.
No, that's more correct anyway, so. So documentation that a majority of the
Yeah.
owners of
It-
It's on the
majority of
staff.
the
Right
properties.
here.
Yeah.
The bound, oh, I see. Petitions bring. Yeah,
We can
that's
use
good.
that language.
That's good. That's good language, yeah.
Okay.
I think that would be
Okay.
perfect.
So
So there
I
was a,
think we also wanted to know, I know we get into design guidelines and that topic later.
right,
And so you're not, you're striking that part here where you strike design guidelines proposed as an aid to decisions on certificate of appropriateness. Number H. You see where I am?
no, where are you? Number 2?
Under, is where we were just talking. Where it was added petition with
Oh,
the
yeah.
signature.
H.
But you struck
Oh,
out
gotcha,
the other
gotcha.
part about the
Mhm.
design
Right, right, right.
guidelines that would be proposed.
Right,
So I think our question would be, as we talked about tonight, there were design guidelines for new construction. And of course, right now, well, in the code, and as we get into that more in the months ahead, there are different guidelines for each local district or landmark that are determined. And so if, for example, Chautauqua Park was adopted, maybe some of the design guidelines might include something about the vegetation,
right,
which wouldn't apply to Old Town necessarily. It wouldn't apply to Old Town as Old Town is written now,
right,
or if the downtown were to become a local district.
right.
So the factors that are unique to that property are supposed to guide those design guidelines. To have the design guidelines, so then when you're reviewing a request, you have that tool.
Exactly.
So if maybe you want to put it somewhere else, but that's why that was included here as part of a designation that some design guidelines would be proposed.
Okay.
You want me to? Yeah.
Yes, you have a comment, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about doing guidelines,
Right, we did
For-
talk about that.
historic districts, and based on the standards. So rather than we're hoping to have more districts. And rather than having a huge section for every district with separate guidelines, I think we're kind of moving towards, at least this commission, the ones that have been working on this are thinking that having a standard set of guidelines that apply to all districts is, and if you have unique features in a district, when you're surveying that, you need to make sure that that's a contributing feature so that that comes under review. But you would still have the same set of guidelines that would apply to every district.
So am I hearing you say you would have design guidelines that would apply everywhere, but then you may have some specific things that do apply to each individual?
But those individual districts in their nomination or their designation, those, if they have unique features, they need to be identified in that nomination so that it's covered by the design guidelines.
Right, but the enforcement of any kind of certificate of appropriateness, we don't go back to the nomination when we're reviewing a certificate of appropriateness. We look at what the code says. So, we wouldn't go back to the the design guidelines that would be specific to a district or a landmark would be created from the nomination, from what is determined to be unique or defining characteristics, those things. So we're kind of saying the same thing different ways. Those things would have to be identified and put into a format that then guides the implementation where the rubber meets the road, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some fine tuning with the definitely with the wording in the ordinance, but I think that the whole idea of going through the ordinance is to make it more user-friendly and make it easier to administer. And if you can consolidate that way, that's a way to simplify it and make it more understandable, I think. So I think it's just a matter of how we do it.
Okay.
So, but I think it seems like a difficult thing for a neighborhood that's maybe doing their own survey and then for them to also come up with design guidelines. I just don't think they have the expertise to do that. And I think it's kind of out. I just think it's too much to require, I guess. And more than that is necessarily that I think when we're fixing the code that we should be able to fix that so it works better.
Okay.
So that's another thing to revisit, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in here that go together.
Right.
I mean, it's
Exactly.
like a fabric tapestry.
Yeah,
So, you change the thread or color here, we just have to make sure that it all fits together in the end and that the definitions are consistent and support everything.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Would you anticipate that these design guidelines would change as different districts do their own surveys and have their own features? do you anticipate that you may do some fiddling over time with them?
They should be pretty fixed. I mean,
Universal.
it's possible you could do some tweaking, just like this ordinance. It's, you could leave it the way it is and have it for another 50 years, but, it's good to always review things like that to make sure you have what you need.
Well, I
So-
think in an earlier memo I came across, it was the intent that there would be regular reviews of Chapter 31, anticipating additions and changes to the kinds of things that be brought before the commission. So that's what we're doing now. And we certainly have an active situation right now with the new neighborhood area that we're looking at. So this is a good time to see what's consistent and what isn't. So further discussion on Section 8. Let's see here. Did we get to number 2 yet? How are we doing? Are we all dead yet? Almost, huh? Okay, Section 2, number 2 of Section 31.8, the designation of a landmark. Basically, this is almost identical to the designation of a district. And again, we want to change the language where a landmark can be also city council, could be a proposer of a landmark.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then it's almost identical kinds of criteria are needed to verify. So any discussion or items on that part? Yeah. Oh, there was a question here in the city's thing. I'm sorry. The boundary description. There was a suggestion that just the map would be required, but then the city says the boundary description is needed for rezoning purposes because it's an overlay.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things.
Yeah, I wondered about that when I
Yeah.
changed that.
So it's kind of check. Okay, the last part of this review is Section 31.9, the public hearing and enactment procedures. And basically, this is how we bring it to council. There's just two pieces to it. Oral and written testimony concerning the significance of the nominated district or landmark shall be made at a public hearing before the commission. The Planning and Housing Department shall notify by certified mail all the property owners of a proposed landmark or within a proposed district 20 days prior to the public hearing. And the commission will review the proposed designation and make a recommendation. So that's basically how it comes forward from the application piece. And then the second part is the council's piece. The city council shall make the final determination on a proposed landmark or district designation. Designation of such an area shall be by enactment of an ordinance to amend the official zoning map to show a designated area, basically an overlay, in accordance with the hearing notice and procedures required, Chapter 414 of the Iowa Code. So that's basically how it gets to be put into the ordinance if we have new landmarks or districts. And there were some recommended editing for clarity's purposes. City staff said omitting the requirement for review of a proposed district by the state SHPO may be a requirement of the certified local government agreement. City staff will contact the SHPO to make that determination. And that's a piece that I don't know was there when the ordinance was first put together. The thing about the SHPO, the certified local government.
Ray had indicated to me that anytime we have made any changes to the ordinance, any changes at all to Chapter 31,
Right,
that we've asked SHPO to review it.
right.
So I guess historically, that's what we've done.
Yeah, and that's pretty typical. I think having them review a local designation. That's something I've not seen. Otherwise, I don't know, unless it's in the CLG agreement, I think that's an extra step that doesn't need to be done.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
but we can add
Yeah,
that comment.
if you research that, that's kind of what
Okay.
was my idea for that anyway, so.
And that takes us to the end of this part of Chapter 31, basically how we designate the areas that we consider of historic significance in our community. We had kind of parceled out the chapter, the ordinance to go over each meeting a little bit. We had thought of looking at the next sections would be the certificate of appropriateness, which we just did. And those are pretty dense. And we had thought about looking at sections 10 and 11, but I'm suggesting we just do 10 in order to get home in a reasonable time. Does that sound
Okay, yes.
like, so I would recommend that at our next meeting in August, that we look at section 10 of the certificate of appropriateness. So that's agreeable. I'll add that too. And I'll be making the changes and stuff, like I said, this ongoing table I'm doing that has all the comments and referrals and stuff, so that we ultimately will have something that has everybody's things across the board, so.
Susan, I have one quick comment.
Sure.
Not to
Please.
drag this on, but the suggested addition of the petition, or sorry, application of the property owners,
Right.
I really support
Okay.
when we're talking about a district. And the designation of a landmark is kind of in parallel with the description and the steps. But I don't see a property owner portion when we talk about a historic landmark, not in the existing ordinance or in the suggested edits. Is that intentional?
I don't think so.
Okay. Is that something maybe we want to consider suggesting adding?
What do you
So
mean
having
property
a
owner?
property owner,
portion?
So for example, when we talk about the historic district, suggestion addition is, what's on these?
It's the first one, and it was like number 8, it was the
Yeah.
documentation.
Petition
don't
with the
have
signature
that
property owners, but we
for
don't
the
have
landmark.
anything for the landmark. Yeah.
Could a landmark be more than one parcel? More than one property owner? Because otherwise they'd be the one applying, right?
No, it says a landmark can be proposed by any person or organization. So the way I read this, somebody who does not own the object
yeah.
can get
The
it.
only
Can
thing
propose.
is if you require an owner's consent, if you get a developer that comes in and he or she doesn't give consent, you're really totally prevented from ever having any kind of review process. So for individual landmarks, it's better to have it be allow other people to submit and not require an owner consent. So a lot of places do require owner consent, but it does kind of defeat the purpose of trying to preserve something that's really significant. So
I remember the way back in the 70s, early preservation stuff in Wichita, there was a building we were petitioning to save because of a lot of Art Deco extra stuff. The owner was not for that. He wanted to put in a laundromat so bad. And it was called the Dunn Building. And ultimately, he did one of those 11th hour, 11 o'clock in the evening, demolitions. So it was done, but not forgotten. It was a bad pun, but I mean, it was just really, he really didn't want to hear anybody's, he was going to put in that laundromat and it wasn't going to look like that, So that is something about landmarks. That is true. You can
So I guess the answer question is more like, can an owner petition or, initiate? Because it doesn't really say that here, but yeah, we wouldn't want it to say that it has to be required.
Right,
Right, so, I mean. again,
right.
I could see it argued both ways. Maybe
Yeah, you really can.
because we could definitely visualize a situation where an owner wants to do something with the property, but from a historic protection standpoint, it's a different avenue. But could an owner could one of the steps here be required that an owner has to give us, I don't know, I'm just spitballing here, but
Yeah,
some
yeah.
input from the owner goes into the council's consideration, or maybe in the situation we're talking about, the owner could petition for it to not become a landmark too, on the
Right,
opposite side.
Well, it would always be a public hearing for the designation, so that owner would always have the right to protest or whatever they wanted to do.
Okay, so that's their avenue, is
that
through the hearing
They do
portion.
have that right, so it
that's
doesn't
true.
keep the owner from
Having any.
not having any say.
Okay, I think that's important, and you're right. I think that's already in there. So that would be where they get to
But
speak
that
up.
is something to
So-
keep in mind.
So then what is the benefit of having the petition for a district? Well, obviously I see the benefit, but what if most of them are against having it preserved? To use your Dunn example. like-
Right. If they choose that they don't want to become a local district,
Mhm.
and then it won't become a local district. But then you don't get advantages, and which is one of the things that when we present some of the things, there are tax credit
Right.
advantages that could be accessible to property owners. Maintaining older structures always has a little more cost to it sometimes, or what are their choices? So that's one of the things we try to demonstrate, that, it's gotten this far as something that people, as a desirable location, as something that people want to live, and they want to preserve certain elements of that. But to do that, sometimes they need a little help. And that's why becoming a local district, they could access resources that they wouldn't have otherwise. But they will always, folks, I think some non-contributing structures, sometimes people will go through and they'll do whatever they want, but then they suddenly have a non-contributing structure, which means no. Yeah, you may be in the historic district, but no, you don't get to take advantage of the tax credit, things that might have been available. And it's like, well, that's a choice. That is a choice.
Yeah,
So-
I think too, the having a majority supporting it is good PR, and
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's not in a district too. If you have a district, it's not designated, and you have a demolition, you're not losing the district.
No.
You still have your landmark district for later on when somebody wants, if somebody wants to resubmit and have a majority to support it. So it's just more important that the individual landmarks have some way that you can
'Cause they're
at least have a
standalone.
chance to save them,
Yeah, they're
an
standard.
owner.
It was my understanding that Old Town kind of came about because, during the 60s and 70s, people were tearing down old houses and building, multi-unit apartment buildings. So as a homeowner in that, in a historic district, it kind of protects your property as well, that your neighbor can't just do, necessarily whatever they want,
Right.
and hurt
Right.
what you feel is your property
And
value.
hopefully it attracts other people. Like once you've got a district identified, there are people who particularly want to do a historic home or have that kind of features, and so it attracts those people to become homeowners in that area, that kind of a thing too. So.
Because it would be interesting to see, I don't know if there's any way to do it, like to see since that designation happened in Old Town, how many properties that used that, in the 40s and 50s have been split into multi-unit houses were returned back to single
I
family
think there's a
houses.
way to figure that out, but it takes a little research.
Never
Well,
mind.
hey, that sounds like a PhD
Hey, that's
project.
Hey,
Anecdotally, I know one.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, I would just be curious to know,
Yeah.
how that changed the character of the neighborhood, over time.
So this is good work, guys. Very good work. Appreciate all your
Yeah,
this remarks and really seriously taking a look at
yeah,
what
thanks,
we've got.
thanks Eloise for the staff comments. That was really helpful
Yeah.
too. And Susan getting that all organized, that helps a lot.
I
Well,
give
we're-
kudos to Ray for his input.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
We're
Ray.
getting through it, guys. We're getting through it. So we'll carry on then next month with certificate of appropriateness information, and hopefully that'll get us further down the road. Let's see here. So that is, next item up is number 7, the Certified Local Government Grant Update. And Eloise has just recently done a report, and she can give, it's going great guns, guys. So Eloise, give us
So things are progressing very well. The students are on board doing really great work. I tried to put all this stuff in the report that for the state so they could see what we had done, how many applications were received, how many people were interviewed, to show them what process we followed. And we followed the city's protocol for hiring. There's a note at the top to let you know about where we're at with the in-kind hours and contributed materials to date, which is much higher than we would have expected, but that's not really a problem. So, and the total compensation from the grant funds is very low at this point because we did get a late start, and then one of the researchers actually had a presentation in Sweden. So he actually just started last week. So the hours will substantially increase for the month of July, and we'll get a lot more work done. That'll be great. But did any of you have any questions about the report?
I was just curious, in some places I saw that there were 2 researchers hired, and in other places I saw 4.
no.
Oh, there were 4 that were interviewed
Oh, gotcha.
and 2 that were hired.
Gotcha. Okay.
I was very impressed with the qualification of the people
Oh, yeah.
hired.
We've got really 2 great people who are,
So the people that we're interviewing were Susan, and then a planner from our department, Benjamin,
right.
and then a person from HR were the 3 people that conducted the
Just
interviews.
the 4.
So
fine.
thank you, Susan.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It was very interesting. It was fun, actually, to kind of hear about, their experiences. So anyway, I'm delighted that they're taking to it and seem very interested in the project. So they'll be, and hopefully we may have an opportunity that they can, present also to the commission, and
I wondered if they'd be here. Yeah.
right. We hopefully we'll have that opportunity. On a side note to this particular item, as I got a note, it was forwarded to me from Ted. They were sending it to the chair of the state was sending it to the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and he told them that I was the new one. But it's basically letting us know that the next round of grants applications are coming up, and they'll be opening September the 6th. So we are just now getting off on this current one. So we're not seeing this being something we want to jump on right away. But it might be something, though, based on our discussion with Chapter 31 and stuff. There were several grants that were awarded for this program year for design guidelines and things like that that might be worthwhile to look at maybe, and maybe an application for next summer for the 2024 grant round session might be something that we'll be a little further down the road. We'll have more under our belt, and maybe that's the next step in refinement of design guidelines, since we'll have maybe 2 different, at least different kinds of areas that we'll be looking at. So But anyways,
Anybody can prepare the grant application if
Mary
anybody wants
Jo,
to
be
do
happy
it.
to cheer
It's
you
not
on.
me. I will cheer you on.
So, but it is a good experience, and we certainly have learned a lot from this experience. Eloise too, I think it's been a very interesting thing. So, the next item on the agenda is the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions membership discussion, and that was something that Mary Jo had attended one of their sessions, I think, online.
Yeah, there was an online session, but I did talk to Vanessa one day about, I guess she'd be the one that would fill out the application, is the way I understand. That the National Alliance of Preservation Commission is a really good organization to be in. And if we join, then each member of the commission will get their publication, and there's a lot of good information in that publication. I've seen it before. So I think that I don't know if we need to do anything to have
I
Vanessa
think
follow
you would need
through.
to not to have a motion and a
I
second
think
and
we
a
have to
vote.
decide if we're going to
Move
do.
forward to use some of your
The money.
HEC budget for that purpose.
Okay, well, it is the cost is pretty minimal. It's either $100 or $150, depending on whether you count student population, because it's based on population. It's $100 for a medium organization, which is a population of up to 50,000. And then if it's above that, it's 150,000. So I don't know, any questions
So
about
commission,
that?
is there interest in becoming members in the alliance? And then using some of our current budget funds to pay for our membership? We would all then receive, mailings in from them and things like that, and be able to attend workshops and stuff.
Well, they have it used to be an annual conference. I think now it's every other year.
Yeah.
So, and they're excellent. I've been to one of their conferences and they're really good.
So do we have a motion on the table to become members or spend our budget on the membership?
I will move to become members, National Alliance of Preservation Commission, spend some of our budget for the membership fee.
Very good.
And I'll second the motion.
Moved and seconded. We have a vote. All who in favor?
Aye.
Nays? No? Okay, so let's become members.
Okay.
Eloise? So the final thing is commission comments, number 9 on our agenda. The only thing I have is that maybe for our next meeting in August, I was thinking about we do an annual work plan for ourselves that we submit to the state. It's part of our certified local government membership. I mean, we tell them that this is what we think we're going to do, and we say what we're going to do. I think we've been pretty good about doing quite a few things that we put down for 2022, but I thought, is it possible that an idea that we could review and just see if we have anything else we want to do the rest of the year that we want to squeeze in?
To review it.
Okay, so
So maybe just attach what was approved.
maybe attach
for
what was
a
approved,
review.
and we discuss if there's anything we want to do this fall. I know that last year we had like a downtown walk with the Main Street and stuff like that. Maybe there would be something like that. Other commission members are always encouraged to participate in ways that, they'd like to take a lead. So, but let's do that. If we could add that to our agenda for August as well. We'll review our 2022 work plan. Any other commission comments we have right now?
I wanted to report on, I went to the Preserve Iowa
So
Summit.
long ago.
It was June 2nd through 4th, and I would have reported it at the last meeting.
Yeah.
It's been so long, I forgot what I attended, so. Anyway, it was a good conference. And I have this, if anybody wants to take it, they're welcome to it. It was Thursday through Saturday, and the first thing they had on Saturday was a certified local government roundtable, which was a really good discussion with OHP staff and people from around the state, and learned some really interesting things. Don't ask me what they were now because it's been too long ago and I didn't take notes. The keynote speaker was really interesting. Her name was Catherine Rogers Merlino, and she has worked in historic preservation for several years. She's a professor at the University of Washington, and she has written a book on building reuse that's called Building Reuse, Sustainability, Preservation, and the Value of Design. And she emphasizes the reuse of existing buildings, both everyday non-historic and historic buildings, as a critical part of our sustainable future. So she was really interested in reusing buildings, whether they were historic or not, just to prevent materials going to landfill and requiring using new materials when you didn't need to. So that's all about the conference, but I had been thinking about the sustainability issue and how we can, the city's effort to what's the plan?
Climate action plan?
The climate action plan, and how that's moving forward. And I think there should be some input from this commission on that plan, because I heard a presentation on last Friday. They're looking at one of the major actions that they're looking at is retrofit of existing buildings. So I think we need to give some input about historic buildings and how they need to be treated differently, so that if there's, say, incentives for like putting in new windows, that they maybe also have an incentive for repairing windows too, that's included. So I did talk to one of the presenters, and the assistant city manager is one of the main leads on that project too. So I think it would be a good thing for us to get involved in at some point. But anyway, the conference is good. I encourage anybody next year to try to go to it.
We're fortunate to have a budget that the city council grants the commission, and members have an opportunity to go to these meetings. The fees are covered by the budget, so travel by car and registration fees. So.
Sure.
Mary Jo, was there any mention about where it would be next year? I just looked all over their website and I couldn't find anything.
I think it's every other year, so maybe.
Oh, okay.
I think they're having it every year.
Yeah,
Oh, they are?
I think
Okay.
so.
Sioux City, I think.
Newton,
I think Sioux City.
Sioux City? Okay.
Oh, I'm thinking of the commission.
Yeah, and
Yeah, okay. Sioux
Yeah.
City?
I think it was Sioux City, but I'm not for sure.
Interesting.
Okay, we'll keep our eyes peeled. That would be a fun
Yeah.
thing to go to. Right. Any staff comments? Number 10.
I just wanted to mention that I had Laura include in your information on the downtown facade grant program changes that went to the city council last week. So they did approve those. And But then if you wanted to delve into the staff report or the details, you could do so.
I have a question. Will, when the businesses make application and say they want to do some historic, to do some maintenance, will you let us know which buildings are that are,
We can let you know when the cycle is open. It's twice a year.
right?
And is that what you're
I think
saying?
so. I
You'd
guess I
like
just
to know
wanna
when
know,
the
like-
cycle opens and then when
We
it's
won't
going to
be-
go forward to the council?
Right, just a heads up, because I know that it wouldn't fall under our purview, but still it'd be of interest to the commission when structures in the historic district downtown are applying for some maintenance and things like that, just to be aware, just to know.
Right. Well, I think,
When you do get applications, you said it'll be in the fall, like what, September, October-ish?
I don't recall when
Okay.
exactly, but I think that's right.
Okay,
But, I mean, it might be interesting if, the Tribune building, I think is for sale. I think I saw a sign.
right,
And it's not under any protection whatsoever.
right.
So,
It's these little pieces, that are, it's kind of nice to see what's going on
it'd be
and try
great
to
if it
follow.
would have some protection.
Mhm.
Be encouraged to maintain the historic qualities of it.
Right. Well, I'd say we're ready to adjourn, guys. We're number 11. Any motion to adjourn? Any last
We adjourn.
gasps? You move to adjourn?
Yes, I move to
Okay.
adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
All right. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're done.